Welcome, everybody. My name is Jason Sandys. As you can see on the slide, I'm a consultant, so I do this for a living, day-to-day, config manager, real-world deployments. I know the theory, I know the practice, I know a lot of the heartache, a lot of the pain. I spend a lot of my time on the forums, so if you've done any time on the config manager forums, you've probably seen my name, along with a handful of friends of mine. I'm a configuration manager MVP. They don't like other things on these slides, so they got rid of my logo, but whatever. So this session came out of my experience and some experiences that we've had on the forums with folks, really pain points that people continue to have on the forums that get brought up over and over and over again. These are also discussions that we have with the product group from time to time, and the first one that we'll talk about, one of the scenarios, is something that we've actually hopefully been able to get them to change. So that's a good thing. So first off, the title. Anyone know where the title came from? Anybody? One person at MMS got this. So this is a recap of a session we did at MMS. One person.
Paul Simon's on.
No.
What? My name is Al. Yeah, they call me Al. I agree with that.
Nope. It's Collective Soul. It's the title of their first album. So. Well, they may have stole it from him, but sorry, I don't know Paul Simon. So this is one of the things that I don't know, if you know any of the people in the product group, if you know and have been around some of the formalized people, if you've been to the State of the Union and that, SCCM is not the real title for config manager. Right? And if you do Bing, if you do that G search engine, if you do any of the search engines, you're going to come up with something different. So it's not so much that it's wrong, and that's not necessarily the point of this slide. The point of this slide is knowing why people don't use SCCM, specifically why Microsoft doesn't want to use SCCM. So it's a trademark of someone else. And that's a lot of the issues that we're going to go through, is knowing why they exist, how to work your way around them, and figuring out that there are other ways of thinking about some of these topics. So we'll go from there. So here's the 6 topics. These are, like I said, these are ones I've chosen mainly from the forums, mainly from our experience with the product group and with real-world scenarios. As much as possible, some of these actually have some applicability to Config Manager 2012. How many of you have either downloaded the beta or been to a session on 2012? Have you seen 2012? A handful of people. How many people are actually running Config Manager 2007 today? Everybody. So anybody who's not running it today or doesn't have experience, they might get a little lost in here, okay? But bear with me, there's good information even for those folks, but it will definitely benefit you if you do know what I'm talking about most of the time. This is definitely a 400 level session. So let's hop right into the first one. And I'll actually use a clicker here. So boundaries. So these are the 3 predominant types of boundaries. Anybody know what the 4th one is? Well, that's not really a boundary. So he said no boundaries. So nobody knows what the 4th one is. The 4th one is IPv6, right? We can actually have an IPv6 boundary. Anyone running IPv6 in production? 1, 2. Well, that's more. So at MMS, I had, 300-400 people in the room, and only one person raised their hand. So that's interesting. But in general, these are the 3 types that most people use. We have our 80 sites, our IP subnets, and the IP range. So the real problem with boundaries, right, and some of you may have stumbled into this. Sometimes you don't even have these issues, so some of this information, may not be applicable to your exact configuration. But the reality is still there, and you can still hit this issue. So you can't use supernets with IP subnets, and you really can't use supernets with 80 sites. So this is something the product group put out a blog post about a little while ago. It's probably about 2 years ago, saying that, hey, you can't do this with 80 sites. Well, you can't really do it with IP subnets either. And so this is a problem because a lot of people are doing subnet aggregation, either on their Active Directory sites, maybe their network people are doing it. And so they want to actually combine their 80 sites or their IP subnets into smaller, and having less boundaries in Configuration Manager. This causes a problem. Why? The number one reason is on the bottom, and we'll launch into a quick example. But let me show you this in the console real quick. So I have my console here, and I will zoom in as needed. So let's go ahead and create a new boundary. So we're just going to go ahead and click on New Boundary. And we have our IP subnet. It's the default boundary that most people are going to use. Well, that's not always such a good thing, and I'll show you why. So if we type in any random network, so we're just going to do our normal 192.168. Doesn't really matter what we put in at the end. We put in our subnet mask. Typically, this is going to be a 24-bit subnet mask. So we'll just go ahead and do that. And notice it filled in our subnet ID at the bottom. So let me go ahead and click OK. Now let me go back and edit that, or do the properties. Notice that the network and the subnet mask are gone. The only thing left is the subnet ID, right? It doesn't actually know that there was a range in there. It doesn't know anything else except for the network ID. So what's the problem with that? It's making an assumption that our IP addresses are still in a classful world. So does anyone remember pre-CIDR, so in the classful world way back when, so we had A, B, C. So a couple of hands went up. So this is circa early 90s. About in 1993, they actually came up with the classless internet domain routing. And this was one of their solutions for the exhaustion of IPv4 addresses. So what does it mean? Wrong button. So if we have an IP address that's classful, so this is a class A subnet, right? These are what the 10 addresses are. And we give it, or we have the subnet ID of 10.0.0. We know that because in a classful world, our subnet mask is always going to be 255.0.0.0. It's just by definition what happens in a classful world. So there you go. There's our subnet mask. Now, when we move to the modern world, which has pretty much been there for about 10, 15 years, if we have an IP address 10.0.151.17, right, some random address, obviously, we have no idea what the subnet ID actually is because we don't know what the subnet mask is. We can't just assume that it's a Class A network. Is it? In a lot of cases, yes. But it doesn't have to be a Class A network. And actually, when most people do this, they're actually going to go 255, 255, 255.0 because that's what most people are used to putting in. They're used to putting in that 24-bit subnet mask. That obviously isn't valid in a classful world, though. So let's look at a different one. So in a classful world, 192, we can see that that's a Class C address in a classful world. And there's our subnet mask. And there's our valid IPs that are going to be in there. Going to a classless world, kind of the same story, right? Just because it happens to be in the Class C range doesn't mean that it's going to be a 24-bit subnet mask. And so we have no idea what the valid IPs are. We know what our starting one is going to be, but we have no idea what the end one is. And so if you equate that to what we just saw on the console, right, the console just translated it into a subnet ID or a network ID. I mean, there's different names for that you can call that. And that is, obviously going to confuse Config Manager. Config Manager is not going to be able to tell you exactly what's there. So if all of your IP addresses are still conforming to classful, then you're most likely not going to have an issue. But if they're not, if you're doing anything else different, you're going to run into this issue. So quickly on the SuperNet, and this is really where the issue sometimes comes in also. So for a SuperNet example, we have our IP subnet of 10.0.0, and this is actually a real-world example. I had this at a customer a couple years ago, and this is where I started discovering what was going on with this. And we sat there scratching our heads for a while to figure out exactly what was going on. So we have our 80-site subnet, right? And that's potentially where we're going to get it from. So we have our client that has that address, right? A 24-bit subnet mask, that's our 255, 255.0. So for an IP subnet, as we just saw, if we did this in the console for Config Manager, we're going to get our subnet ID of 10.0.0.0 because it's going to make that assumption that it has a /8 or the 255.0.0.0. Similar, if we get that information out of Active Directory, we're going to get that 10.0.0.0 also. So one of the things that most people don't know is that when we do an Active Directory system discovery in Config Manager, it has no idea what the client, right? What IP address, what subnet mask, it knows nothing about the client during a discovery. The discovery never touches the client. But it has to go to Active Directory to get the subnet information. If it just has an IP address, which is all it's going to get for the DNS resolution, it has to make a leap. And that leap comes from Active Directory. So 80-site discovery will actually query your 80 sites and your IP addresses that or your subnets that you have defined in Active Directory. But it's perfectly valid to put a range in Active Directory, whereas with your IP subnets, it's not. So down here, what actually happened is if you notice with the /24, our subnet ID is actually 10.0.1.0. It's not 10.0.0.0, right? Because we live in the classless world, whereas Config Manager, unfortunately, is still living in a classful world. And it's just going to make a simple comparison, right? 10.0.0.0 doesn't equal 10.0.1.0, and now we have an issue. Config Manager is not going to see that as being in our boundary. And this comes up over and over and over again. So if you're using 10s, it's really going to be a problem. If you're using 192s, not such a big deal, right? You probably haven't seen this in your environment. If you're using anything that was considered in that Class C boundary, you're not going to see this necessarily. But if you're using any other type of IP address, you're probably going to see this crop up. So a quick discovery example, I talked through this a little bit. Kind of the same type of thing, because our discovery is actually going to get that information out of our AD site subnet. And in this case, right, we tried to be smart in Active Directory, or whoever your Active Directory administrator was. They tried to be smart, and they tried to combine 192.168.14 and 192.168.15 into one subnet in Active Directory, which is perfectly valid. Active Directory treats that as a range. It treats it as 192.168.14.1 all the way through 192.168.15.255, right? Because that's what that /23 tells us to do. Essentially, it's aggregating two smaller networks together to have one bigger network. Perfectly valid in Active Directory. It treats it properly as a range. Well, unfortunately, Config Manager will still make that assumption that it's a classful address. It'll slap the /24 on there because Discovery actually got the information from Active Directory. It got the subnet ID of 14. Whereas the client is telling it, oh, I'm on 15 because my subnet mask is actually /24. So a little bit of math going in there. Oh, there we go. There's a little bit more there. More or less what I talked through. Like I said, a little bit of math going on there. Maybe you didn't follow each and every little piece that I said there. But the real point of that all is don't use IP subnets ever. This is one of the things we tell people on the forums over and over and over. A fellow MVP friend of mine that did the session with me in Vegas, Kim Opelfens, we really hammered on the product team this year to try to get this completely removed from the product. They were not budging for a few different reasons, but we've hopefully got some things changed. So hopefully in 2012 you're going to see IP subnets deprecated or at least moved down the list. But like I said, the biggest thing, there's a bunch of different things that are on here of why not to use those. But the biggest thing is just don't, right? It causes you a little bit more work up front potentially if you're not using IP subnets, but using the IP ranges is definitely the way to go because you always know there's no ambiguity. So I guess that goes back to, if you didn't understand all those things, don't worry about it because the main point is nobody really understands some of those things at times. And so just go ahead and use something that you do understand, which is IP ranges, right? If I put in 192.168.1.5 through 192.168.1.7, I know exactly what IPs are in that range. All right, high availability and site resiliency. How many of you have requirements in your environment for HA? Okay, so not everybody. So how many of you have your configuration manager set up in an HADR or a HA-friendly way? A subset of that. So I actually worked with a customer. They have 2 data centers on their campus. They're supposed to be exactly a mile apart. They weren't. Through some weirdness, but they were supposed to be exactly a mile apart on their campus. And they had a business level requirement that absolutely everything in one data center was mirrored in the other data center. And so this is perfectly up their block, and they had to do these kind of things. I'm kind of surprised that more people don't have this. Now, at the end of the day, does Config Manager need to be highly available in your environment? Maybe, maybe not, right? If your data center blows up, if you're having major issues, do you really need Config Manager? That's kind of a business level question and whether they're willing to pay for it. Kind of the problem with high availability and site resiliency is that it's not perfect out of the box with Config Manager today. So we have all these different things. We can categorize them into 2 lists here. We have site functionality. We have all those wonderful things as administrators that we're used to. And then we have our client functionality. We want to make sure that the different roles, because each role has its own essentially way of making it highly available in infrastructure. So what are those? Or let's actually look at the impacts of what those are, right? So if we lose our database, we're pretty much, hosed. There's not much we can do about it. Config Manager completely relies upon the database. Our management point, we're going to lose some functionality there. The clients are going to be okay, although they're not going to be able to receive anything new. The SMS provider, anybody know what the SMS provider specifically does? Anybody? One person? What does it do? Yeah, it's essentially the console to the database, right? Anytime the console makes any changes, any data that needs to go back to the database, exactly. So not the most important component, right? Config Manager is going to be happy without it, but you're not going to be able to do anything. So the clients don't really care if that's there. They're not talking to the database anyway, but you're not going to be able to make any changes. So it really depends upon your importance level, how important that one is. Reporting points, okay, I can't report, not such a big deal. DPs, that's probably one of your more critical ones, right? Software distribution is probably one of your level 1 things that Config Manager does for you. Pixie, software update points, well, probably pretty critical depending upon exactly which hat you wear in your organization. And state migration, So you really kind of have 3 options for high availability in Config Manager 2007 today. You have the out-of-box way, we can virtualize, or we can do boot from SAN. So here's the out-of-box way. And you can kind of see that pink box all the way over there on the right. There's some things we just can't do anything about today, at least in a supported out-of-the-box way. The SMSP, the provider. There's no solution for it, unfortunately. The SLP, which probably isn't such a big deal, and the fallback status point, which probably isn't such a big deal either. But if you have that 100% HA requirement, you're not going to be able to fulfill it with things that come out of the box. And NLB clusters, a lot of people really don't like NLB clusters. If you're implementing on ESX server and you're trying to do an NLB spread across multiple ESX hosts, ESX doesn't like that, so your NLB dies. So there's definitely some problems with this. Failover cluster, how many of you actually have clusters in your environment? Well, I guess the reverse, how many of you are scared of clusters in your environment? Or how many of your data center group is scared of clusters? It's not unusual for data center folks to be scared of clustering. I've got some bigger customers, they refuse to do it just because, I don't know, it's hard to convince some people of certain things. So there's some HA out of the box is really the whole point of this slide. So this is kind of the easy button solution, right? Just virtualize. Config Manager is perfectly supported on any of the approved hypervisors. So ESX, Hyper-V, of course. You can go to the Citrix route. There's a bunch of other hypervisors that are actually approved. I don't know of anybody using any of the other ones, but they all work fine. And now you can use your high availability solution with whatever that hypervisor solution is. So live migration with Hyper-V. What is it called? I don't remember the ESX one, but vMotion. There you go. And so that's kind of the easy way to get it done. Now, that's going to potentially be some disaster recovery for you also, right? Because you could set that up in a multi-site infrastructure. And so now you can actually move that across. Now, you need some network magic potentially, right? Because Config Manager site server is going to potentially change IP addresses. So you either have to span your VLANs, you have to use something like GSLB to point the clients to the correct location. But you can get there. And it really is kind of an easy button solution if you already have that infrastructure set up. Wow, I don't have the slide for the third one. The third one is the boot from SAN. And so that's the client that I was referring to. That's actually what they did. So that one can potentially be an easy button solution, but that one's going to potentially be a costly solution because you're talking about storage migration or storage availability at that point. So they actually had to replicate all of their storage from one data center to the other. And then they booted their Config Manager server off of that storage. So depending upon how you look at it, that one may even be an easier solution. I guess the real point there is there are ways to get there depending upon the exact requirements in your environment. And don't limit yourself to exclusively what's out of the box. Now, Config Manager 2012 is going to up the ante a little bit. I created this slide deck a little while ago, so it's not actually in here. But for the no solution, the SMS provider is actually going to get addressed in Config Manager 2012. We're going to be able to have multiples of those. So the console will dynamically choose which one. Actually, I don't remember how the console chooses, but it does choose which one to go to, which one's closest. The NLB cluster, they're actually going to kind of get rid of that functionality because I don't think the product group is so happy about NLB clusters in general either. I think it'll still be there, but they're actually talking about ways getting around it. So you're actually going to be able to have multiple management points in a single site in Configuration Manager 2012 also now. So that would be a nice one to give some resiliency to the clients getting their policies. Everything else is going to pretty much stay the same, the multiple systems for the DPs and that. But now we're going to really be able to get close or all the way to that complete high availability out of the box with 2012. Wonderful animation. Okay, how many of you are doing operating system deployment and using software updates? How many of you are doing it with Windows 7? And how many of you is it working for? Wow, so the hands kept going down. I'm kind of surprised that it's continuing to work for people. So the reason I say that is because I created this slide a while ago. I actually created this slide before MMS. And it mostly worked even before MMS, which was about a month and a half ago. The problem is that Sustained Engineering had been researching a problem for, I don't know, something like 8 months. And essentially, if you had more than about 80 updates, there were different numbers all over the place. There were times when people said that it was because you had Intel SATA drivers, and even the Sustained Engineering team was saying that. Or if you had Office in your image, that the process would just hang. And so kind of jumping down to the last bullet there, Friday, they actually released this hot fix. So I don't have it in the slide deck, right? We had to have these slide decks in before Friday. But it's definitely on my Twitter feed, and I'll put up a link at the end sometime. But that hotfix came out on Friday. I haven't had a chance to test it. Hopefully it works, because this is a huge pain point for folks. Making sure that the software updates actually work during the task sequence. You want them to go out during the task sequence. There are some other things that you can do also. There's some known issues that the hotfix didn't address. Things like making sure that you set your management point and your SLP during the task sequence. So why do we want to do that? Because during the initial part of the task sequence, our client is actually a workgroup client, right? It's Windows PE. It doesn't have any identity out on the network. And so we want to make sure that we're going to hard code the actual where the client's going to talk to once it gets down to that system. We don't want to have to rely on auto-site assignment during the task sequence. And there's also one idiosyncrasy with the install software update task that causes it to break if you don't hard code these. So it's best just to hard code these. If you're doing it with MDT, you can do it in the cs.ini. If you're doing it in Config Manager, I'll show you where to do that real quick. So let's hop into my mini task sequences here. And we'll pick my build and capture. And I'll zoom in on this in a second here. So it's just as simple as that. Right? We put in our MP and our SLP. That way we don't have to rely on wins. Right? We don't have to rely on it even contacting Active Directory. And this is particularly important during the build and capture. Right? The build and capture never joins the domain. So the build and capture can never contact Active Directory to get this information. So it would have to rely on wins and an SLP. So why not just hard code those things in? And so that's the best way to do it. Or you can put it in your CSINI also to get there. The other thing, and I don't have a task sequence with this in there, so we can actually walk through it. This was my preferred solution, and I did a blog post about this a little while ago. Kind of something I stumbled upon. I'm not a huge MDT fan, as anybody who knows me knows pretty well. But during MDT, and like I said, I just discovered this, and this is actually kind of changing my mind quite a bit on MDT. What we can do is MDT has this task, and I got to find it. Here we go, MDT. And it is the install updates offline. So we can actually add this task to an MDT task sequence during Config Manager. And what it will actually do is it'll take updates that you already have in Config Manager. So you have to have your software updates configured, just like you do, if you were using the normal task. It will take those and it will install it to the image that you're deploying before that image goes live. So it's going to use DISM to do that. It's an offline update. And it's before that, from a security guy's perspective, we want the updates part of the operating system before that operating system comes on the network. Right? We don't want to have an unpatched system come up. And so this is actually going to patch that image directly, before it's ever online. In general, this seems to be faster, right? Because it's not an online operating system. We don't have to worry about files that are in use. We don't have to worry about all those things. And this is something that the Windows engineers built in. The DISM tool's there. All it's doing is calling a script I think it's called ZTI Update behind the scenes, and it's able to apply all those updates. Honestly, at this point, this is my preferred method, even over the install software updates task. Even after they've released that hotfix, this is going to be my preferred method because there's some other little weirdnesses that come with software updates. Plus, I've seen them just take forever. Right? If you're doing XP, this isn't applicable. All right, we can't do anything with XP, so get up to Windows 7. But even if you're doing Windows 7 RTM today, right, non-SP1, I think I installed a VM the other day, and it had like 30, 40 patches at least. I think it might have even been 50 patches already. And that just takes a long time for that stuff to download and to apply to a running operating system. But if we can just download them and get them into the image, or actually, this is going to be a deployment task sequence. If we can download them and apply them in an offline mode, it's going to be a lot faster and a lot more reliable. Yep. So the question was, does it do applicability logic? So no, actually it does. So DISM's very smart about that. There's a whole CBS. I talk a lot about this in my blog post. The CBS is the component-based servicing, and this is part of Windows Vista. It's been part of Windows since Vista Service Pack 1, and it actually does explicit applicability checking. So it makes sure that that patch is needed for that image in an offline fashion, right? We haven't mounted it, we haven't booted into it or anything. And it will only apply those that are needed. So if you happen to have an image that's sitting around that's already patched, you can absolutely use this task. Now, it's only going to do OS updates, right? But that shouldn't be a huge deal, at least from a security concern, right? Office, you're not launching Office during the deployment. You want to make sure those updates get down. You're not going to do any other applications like Adobe Reader or anything like that. So there's still some room for some other solutions like the install software task. But like I said, this is definitely the way to go. Now, applicability for 2012, they actually added a task in the console in 2012 to schedule offline updates to an image. So it won't be part of a task sequence formally. But if you have an image imported into Config Manager 2012, you can right-click on that image, and you can actually deploy updates to that image as a separate task. You can schedule that also because presumably that's going to take a little while, and you don't want to have the GUI right in your face. Or you're going to schedule it because you're going to want that to happen on a periodic basis as you're updating your updates in your software updates piece of Configuration Manager. So I'm really looking forward to that piece because that kind of takes it out of the task sequence. It's kind of a little bit of a thing that they're doing with 2012. They're moving certain things out of the task sequence that don't necessarily need to be there. Like updates, right? Why should you have to redeploy updates over and over and over again? You already have this image. Why not just maintain the image? So DISM can do that for you today. So you can actually get there today if you want, either by using this or doing it from the command line. Just go do some research on DISM. This is a good way to do it. But in 2012, they're going to make it straight part of the console. I've got a couple of links at the end. There's a blog post, and a little bit of an older blog post that has some other things to go through for the software update points to make sure that you've got everything configured correctly. The Windows Update Agent's another big one. Make sure you get the latest one in there, especially if you're doing XP. Right? Get the latest one in there. XP's got a really old one in there by default. That one that's right under the link there, I thought I took that one out. That's an old thing. If you've upgraded to Service Pack 2 in Configuration Manager, you should have upgraded to WSUS SP2, and that actually gets fixed in there also. And of course, the IP address range boundaries. Right? We talked about how in a build and capture, it's not part of the domain. So if you're using 80 sites for your boundaries, right, you're not going to get anything because obviously it doesn't work. And the hotfix, it's there. I don't have a link. Like I said, it came out Friday, but it's on my Twitter, and I need to update my blog posts with it also. I did the demo already. WMI Health. So how many of you had issues with WMI Health? Well, everyone who didn't raise their hand, you probably did, you just didn't know it. It's kind of that old rule, right? If you haven't had it yet, there's two kinds of people. Those who have had it and those who are going to have it at the very least. So, Config Manager is built heavily on WMI. And this is something that the product team has struggled with themselves because it's not a component they own, right? The Windows team actually owns WMI. And so they have to go back to the Windows team, and they filed numerous of their own change requests to the Windows team to get WMI to be more stable, to act in a better way, to not just die at random intervals. Some of that, is not necessarily the Windows team's fault either. So how many of you remember back to the Windows 2000 timeframe when they added the little error reporting dialog box that sent information back to Microsoft, right? So the first month that they had that in production at Microsoft, they discovered that 95% of those reports coming back came from one driver vendor for one driver, right? I never learned who it was. I'm assuming it was a video driver vendor, and there were only two, right? There's still kind of only two, so I'm sure it's one of those two. So kind of the same thing with WMI. Another huge user of WMI is unfortunately our driver vendors. And if you've done any OSD, you know that the driver vendors don't always do things the best way. And so they're another huge culprit in the WMI. Unfortunately, we can't really smack those guys around. But Config Manager is going to rely on that. So as your WMI goes, so does your Config Manager. So there's no magic bullet either. We can hope that Windows continues to improve these things. Some of the DCRs that the product group has filed with the Windows team have improved things. At this point in time, the information that I've always been told, or recently have been told, is that the Windows team is very happy with where WMI is at. They feel that there are no issues with WMI in Windows 7. The product group's not so sure of that. Everyone at this point is kind of in a wait-and-see mode. So how many of you have Windows 7 and have had WMI issues go down that have identified them? Nobody really. That's interesting. So now a lot of the stuff that they moved into Windows Vista and into Windows 7 as far as WMI hotfixes, they actually backported to an XP hotfix also. So if you're running XP in your environment and you haven't deployed this hotfix, right, this isn't a security one. This isn't one that came out from WSUS. So you're going to have to deploy this one explicitly. If you haven't done this one, you're probably going to have WMI issues. And this should bring XP up to a much more stable level. Make sure you get that out there. The second bullet on here is really important too. You had a question, sir?
Yeah, 2003 server as well.
So the question was, is that hotfix also for 2003 server? I don't remember if it's the exact same KB, but yes, they do have a fix for it also. In general, right, servers are a lot more stable because you don't have users doing stupid user tricks on them. And so WMI doesn't nearly have the issues on servers that it does on XP. So the second bullet, right, don't just kill your repository. A lot of people are very fond of just flushing WMI, and it's out on a lot of blog posts out there. How do I fix WMI? Oh, just go delete it. Well, on a client, maybe not such a big deal. If you've got a hierarchy of 150,000 clients, and you've got 1,000 of them that are failing, and you're pretty sure they're WMI, it's hard to tell a tech not to do it, right? Because they just want to fix it and they want to move on. The problem is you never really figure out why it's happening. If you've got 1,000 clients that are doing it, maybe they're all doing it for the exact same reason, and it's a symptom of a driver that's out there. It's a symptom maybe of your security application that you have rolled out. And so if you're just going to flush the repository, you can never do any root cause analysis. And you might break some other things. So that bottom one right there is an interesting one. There was actually a forum post on this recently. And I don't remember the exact details, but essentially someone did flush the repository on one of their site servers. And more or less, I don't think anyone answered because we all just said, oh, you're hosed, because there's not much you can do at that point. And don't really do it on servers either, right? Servers have a lot more driver infrastructures at times. Some of the drivers do different types of things. A lot of the HP utilities are out there. A lot of the Dell utilities out there for servers store a lot of stuff in WMI. So now if you flush WMI, you're not going to get that information back. So definitely bad things to do there. So a handful of fixes. These are manual fixes. This is one. There's actually a blog post. I'm pretty sure I have it linked at the end from the actual Config Manager team of how to fix WMI. So one of the things is just re-register it. Maybe it's not the repository itself that's hosed. Maybe it's some of the DLLs. Maybe it's the architecture behind WMI that's hosed. So go ahead and run this script on those type of clients. There's a built-in repair. So some of those improvements that the Windows team made over time, they actually expose to you, command line albeit, but they did expose to you with those couple of command lines. You can also delete the CCM namespace, right? So this is the Configuration Manager namespace. Maybe the corruption is in Config Manager, or maybe it's a bigger corruption, but you maybe not care about it. We just want to get Configuration Manager to work. So you can do that. Another great option to do this for you automatically, go ahead and close my task sequence. How many of you know this tool by sight? Really? Okay, so this is a huge learning point for any of you who don't know this, because I only think about a third of you raising the hand. This is a tool called SCCM Client Center. It is open source. It is written by a guy named Roger. He's Swiss, so his name is Roger Zander. And it essentially connects directly to a client and allows you to troubleshoot that client. So one of the underlying mantras, if you don't know this, of Config Manager, and they stick very close to this, is the server never reaches out to the client. Right? So all the information that you have on the server side isn't real time. It's only what the client has told the server on the periodic basis that the client checks in. Well, of course, since this tool isn't a Microsoft tool, it's not a product team tool, he can write a tool that can connect directly to the client. So this client uses 100% documented stuff out of the software development kit that the Config Manager team publishes. So it's not doing anything underhanded. It's not doing anything that you're not supposed to do. But it's doing things that the product team doesn't want to put into the product. But they've enabled through APIs. So all I did was connect to my client that I have running, my client called TechEd 2011. And I can go over here to this tab called Install Repair. You can see we have a handful of different things here, like installing the SMS client. But we have this nice little section that Roger added in here called WMI Repair. And these essentially do those things that I just listed on that slide. So now you don't have to worry about running a program, right? If Config Manager's hosed, it's kind of hard to run a program to fix WMI underneath. So you're actually going to have to maybe remote in, or you're going to have to use PSExec, or you're going to have to use something like that. Or, better yet, you can use this tool, because this tool is going to connect straight to the client, it's going to connect to the WMI, and it's going to do these three things. The recreate repository is the flush. That's kind of, this is the CEO's secretary, I don't care, I just need to get her working right now, right? This is the last ditch effort, I'm just going to flush it, and we're going to go on. But the middle one is the deleting the CCM, and then the repair WMI is actually going to go through and try to re-register the DLLs, just like that first script did, and get that back and going. And a lot of the times, most people are going to find that they went right to the bottom when they really didn't need to. Just re-registering the DLLs and everything would have been happy. So this is a great tool for that. There's a lot more in this tool. So those of you that didn't raise their hand, please go check this out. You can search for it. I don't have a link, but you can search for SCCM Client Center, and you will absolutely find it. Everybody that I know of uses this. All the MVPs use it. The product team is aware of it. So it's definitely a great tool to use. There was my demo. All righty, shifting gears a little bit, we're going to permissions. So one of the problems that we see on the forums, and this comes up a lot from newbies, and there's, not putting them down, this is just something that's not intuitive, it's not explicitly called out in the UI, is that anytime you run a program through Config Manager, if you put with administrative credentials, it's going to run as the local system account. Now, we can put current user, but most of the time people want to run with admin privileges. How many of you have clients out there that run with, or the users are local admins? So that number is going down and down and down every year, rightly so, and it needs to be. So all of those that raise your hand, go back and tell them to stop doing that. But that may not be your decision. But it's going down and down, so, right? So that first option is definitely what most people are going to run with, because the current user doesn't have enough privileges to install most of the applications that are out there. The only real way around this, if you have to run as, let's say, some other domain local admin account or something like that, is if you have R2 or R3, we can actually use a single task in a task sequence, and it gives you that checkbox that says, hey, run this thing with alternate credentials. But the most important thing there is that it's the local system account. So how many of you know, I'm going to skip that one real second, I'm going to keep talking about the local system account. The local system account on a client that's joined to the domain, for its domain credentials, it can actually access the domain using its computer account. A computer account in Active Directory is no different than a user account. They inherit from the exact same class. So you can permission on a computer account just like you can on a user account. So it's not that you're limited in any way. And it works 99.9% of the time with most applications. The thing you have to remember, though, is if for some reason you need to go out to a network resource, if you need to do something that requires that authentication over the network, anything, you have to make sure that you ACL or ACL that resource for the local system account. And the easy way to do that is there's a domain group called domain computers. All computers are automatically put in that group, so you can't go click on that group and see all the members. It's a dynamic group in Active Directory. And all you have to do is give permissions to the domain computers. And now anything that you have running as local system can actually have permissions or the ability to access whatever that network resource is. Let's go back to the network access account. So how many of you have a network access account set up? How many of you know what it does all the time? Right, so in general, the network access account, all it's used for is for connectivity to the network. So anytime that local system account doesn't work, so does anybody know when that local system account won't work to go back to Config Manager? Nobody. Okay, one. Yeah, so that is possible, right? I don't think anybody really does that. But so the main use case is untrusted clients. So clients that are in forests that are untrusted or workgroup clients, right? If they're not in my forest, then how do I give them permissions? Kind of like that user that's across an untrusted link or a workgroup client, right? How does he have permissions in my network? So in general, that's always when the network access account is going to get used. So I have a package that needs to go out. Of course, that package is going to download from my DP. That DP is across a trust or a non-trust in most cases. How do I get permissions? And that's where the network access account comes in. It's also required for OSD. Kind of like I was talking about before, operating system deployment, most of it, or at least the first half of it, or if you have build and capture task sequences, run as an uncredentialed or a non-domain system. So you're going to need the network access account there. Don't make this a domain admin, right? There are times when this thing actually comes out in clear text. During OSD at least, but that's just way too many privileges. It's kind of like giving your users admin privileges, right? It's just not a good thing to do. But the programs don't actually run as this network access account. So there was, I think, a feature way back in SMS 2.0 that allowed you to do that, but there's no way to do that directly in Config Manager except for using that single task sequence. Okay, so I think I covered all of that on there, pretty much the two different types of accounts there. And so this starts to come into play also when we have things like drivers. How many of you have imported drivers into Config Manager and the first time were confused out of your mind where things went? Pretty much everybody. I mean, it took me a while to figure out too. But essentially, you're going from a driver source directory. Now, the thing to know, there's always going to be these three different places that your drivers are stored at. You're going to have everything in triplicate, unfortunately. But going from the driver source to where your package source is at, it's actually the system that is running the SMS provider. That server's account is going to be used to do that copy. So if you're running on the Config Manager server itself, then no big deal. It's local system. It has power over all of it. No big deal. But if you're running on a remote console, now you may have issues, especially if your source packages are somewhere else. Because now that server account for your SMS provider needs to have permissions over wherever it was, and it needs to have permissions where you're coming from. So that's a real stumbling block for folks, and it's usually just easier to do it on the server if you don't want to figure out these permissioning. But in larger environments, that's not possible. You don't want to give all of your folks permissions on the server to log in. And then going to the DP, that's your normal permissions. Nothing spectacular there. The big thing is that the SMS provider one. Software updates is somewhat of a similar story, but some different permissions get used here. So anytime you're actually downloading updates, it uses the credentials of whoever's logged on to actually download the updates. So when that actually comes into effect and when that's significant is, obviously if you're on a remote console, even if you're on the server console, but if you have a proxy server, right? If you have a proxy server out there that's requiring some type of authentication, now it's going to use your credentials if you're the one that's downloading those updates. It's not going to have any stored credentials. It's not using the server credentials or anything like that. So that's probably a good thing in most enterprises. You don't want to give your server necessarily permissions to go out and get things. But at the same time, if you don't know that, you're going to have proxy authentication issues.
I think it's worth mentioning that when you set the proxy information, you got to do it in Internet Explorer. There's no other place to do it.
Correct. Correct. So this is using, whatever credentials you have. So the statement was that you have to set these proxy credentials or the configuration of the proxy in Internet Explorer. There's actually a way to do it from the command line also, but generally people do it from Internet Explorer. So it's whatever you have configured in Internet Explorer that's going to happen. So if you have that pushed down via group policy, that's what's going to be there. This is, like I said, usually it's a good thing because that's how your proxy is set up, right? Your proxy administrators, they haven't thought about actually giving computers permissions to go out to the internet. It's probably a bad thing from their perspective. So you want this kind of thing to happen. It's also a very good thing if your servers don't have direct access, via proxy server, via not, in an isolated network type scenario, where maybe your workstation does have access to the internet, but your server segment doesn't have access to the internet. That's not a stumbling block for you anymore. Getting the catalog is potentially a stumbling block, but actually downloading the updates is no longer a stumbling block. And so, because it's going to download to our workstation first, using our credentials, and then it's going to move over to our update package source. Backup is another fun one for permissions. If you have your database server separate from your site server. How many of you guys are using remote SQL servers? Really? Stop, but no. It's fully supported, but there's always idiosyncrasies, and there's some security idiosyncrasies around this. You can see each server is going to use a different service, right? SQL Server is going to have a different service. This is installed by Config Manager. And of course, our site server is going to have a different service. So it's going to go to a common UNC most likely. You don't necessarily want those backing up locally. If they're backing up locally, you don't have this issue. But if you're going to a common UNC where you then have your enterprise backup product coming and grabbing that information, then each of them is going to have permissions. And once again, this goes back to that system account, right? If you look at those services, they're running as local system. So who is local system on the network? If that UNC is not local, which is the next one, there we go, then it's going to use the AD computer account. If that UNC happens to be local, then it's actually going to use local system. So the interesting thing that happens here is if that UNC actually happens to reside on one of those servers, going over a UNC path still uses that computer's AD account, even if that UNC is ultimately local to that system. It won't use local system. So you still need to make sure you put those permissions on both the share level, right, and the NTFS level. Most people just go into share level, and then they're like, I have permissions. But, well, you really don't if you haven't gone and set the NTFS permissions, right? It has to be in both places. This one trips up a lot of folks. And you can usually see this in the logs. I've seen permissions get reset at weird times, too. So make sure you go back and check if things are breaking on you. Make sure you go back and check the exact permissions. All right, client status. This is one that trips up a lot of new administrators because there are multiple different statuses that each client can have in the console. And the biggest one, right, and a lot of this goes back to that underlying premise that I mentioned before, that the server never reaches out to the client. So we see forum posts like this all the time. Hey, I just installed my client. It still says client equals no. What do I do? Well, that's because they don't understand that premise, right? It's not in bold letters when you install Config Manager. So it's something that a lot of people just don't know. And it comes to that second bullet, right? Config Manager, because it isn't reaching out to clients on a constant basis, and actually it's never reaching out, it's waiting for that client to check in at our polling intervals. It just doesn't know what the status of the client is until the client actually tells them. That's sometimes a good thing, that's sometimes a bad thing. You just have to be patient. Config Manager, SMS had the dubious distinction of maybe being known as slow-moving software. Config Manager's improved a lot of those things, and a lot of that user experience has sped up quite a bit. But this is one of those areas, right? You just have to wait for that client to check in. Can we force it to check in? Yes, there's lots of ways to force it to check in. Roger's tool is one of the ways to make it check in out of cycle. You can, of course, decrease that cycle period. By default, it's 60 minutes. You don't want to go anywhere south of 15 minutes. It really just depends upon what your needs of your organization are. But it really comes back down to the client having to check in and for you to wait for that thing to go. So what actually flips it? There's a heartbeat discovery that happens also. So there's multiple different ways that the client can tell the server, hey, I'm installed, and I'm happy, and I'm good to go. Heartbeat discovery is one that I usually crank down quite a bit, and that's one of those things that tells the server right away that what's going on. It can be cleared. So if you have clients that just seem to kind of go away, but they still say client equals yes. So the opposite issue, right? Your clients don't say no anymore. They actually say yes when you know that client's gone. There's a maintenance task called clear install. And this will run on a periodic basis, and any clients that haven't checked in and whatever value you set in here, it will actually set back to no. So that's a good thing for clients maybe that do exist still and the client's gotten hosed. Or maybe the users turned the client off, or maybe the user found out how to uninstall the client, right? So if the client's not there, it can't tell the server that he's not there anymore. So of course the server is still going to say client equals yes. I'll show you that maintenance task real quick. Nothing spectacular about it. So if we go into our site server here, and we go to maintenance, we go to our tasks, and it's right there in the middle. So that clear install maintenance task, you can see on mine it's off, and by default it's also off. So you have to be a little bit careful with this one, right? What do we set these times to? By default it's 21 days. Is that enough time? Is that too much time? It really depends upon your workforce. So if you're from across the pond in Europe where you get like 6-week vacations every 2 months or whatever, then that's probably not nearly enough time for you to have this. If you work, for somebody who's hardcore, some small company where you never get any time off, or you work for a Japanese firm where they definitely, they work 20 hours a day, then setting this down to 7 days might be enough. But this is just a way to tell the server now, hey, go ahead and try to reinstall to these clients because I haven't heard from them in so long. That's ultimately what it does at the end of the day. All right. The next one is approved. What does approved mean? So this one comes up on the forums a lot. Hey, all my clients are approved NA. Oh my God, what do I do? Is this something bad? In general, no, it's not anything bad. And the reason is the whole approval process that's in Config Manager today is based on them trying to mimic what happens with PKI. So how many of you have a native mode implementation? So a handful of y'all. So this actually doesn't apply to you at all because in native mode, right, our approval process is I got a certificate, a valid certificate to that client. So I know that client is good because my certificate process is there. In mixed mode, I'm not using a PKI to get my certificates out there. So how can I revoke a certificate? Right? With a PKI, I go into my CA and I say this certificate's revoked. But I can't do that in mixed mode with self-signed client certificates. And so that's what this approval process is meant to mimic. We can go into the console and say, hey, this client is no longer approved. So when does it get flipped to NA? If you have an administrator, and this is one that comes up on the forums a lot, hey, all of my clients are now gone. How did they just disappear? Well, you probably had a junior administrator go in and right-click and hit delete, right? And that's almost always what it comes down to being. But the thing is, they'll come back, right? We have our Heartbeat Discovery, and the Heartbeat Discovery will actually bring those clients back in. But when they come back in through Heartbeat Discovery, Config Manager just recreates the record for those clients. Clients don't go through the reapproval process. So that's why they get left at client equals NA. And this is actually not a big deal at all. And the reason it's not a big deal is because the only thing that anybody knows that it affects is out-of-band management. So anybody using out-of-band management? Intel vPro, AMT? Yeah. Okay, so you know nobody's going to be affected, right? And that's pretty much the answer from the world right now. I don't think too many people are using it. And if it flips to NA, like I said, no big deal. If you have the checkbox that says I still have SMS 2003 clients in my hierarchy, right? SMS 2003 clients, they're happy reporting to Config Manager. Config Manager's happy accepting information from them. But if you actually have that checkbox checked, then there is no approval process either because those clients don't even know how to approve, right? That's a new process for Config Manager. So approval, it's not a huge deal unless you, actually it's not a big deal at all. Inactive clients. So this one's the one that's a little bit confusing for a lot of folks also. So the times that a client becomes inactive, and there's actually 3 of them. Do I have all 3 of them? Yeah. So if something gets marked obsolete, so when do things get marked obsolete? That's actually my next slide. But things get marked as obsolete if they get replaced. So we all know there's a bunch of a bunch of unique identifiers that Config Manager uses to identify a client resource. So we have things like the hardware ID, we have things like the SMS ID, we have things like the SMS GUID. But essentially, if a client comes online that has the exact same hardware ID as a client resource that we already have in Config Manager, it's going to get marked as obsolete. When does that happen? Usually imaging, right? When we re-image a box, we're going to have the same hardware ID, but of course it came in as a new record. It's a new installation of the config manager agent. And so it's going to say, oh, look, this is the old one. It's obsolete. And so it's also going to mark it as inactive at the same time. The only other two ways, the third way is actually not a documented way. This is a way that Kim documented and Kim discovered, is that if we delete a resource in a child, and that says domain, it's supposed to be site. So if someone deletes a resource in a child site, that will mark the system as inactive in any of its parent sites. But the second one is the only other way to mark clients as inactive. And I will show you that. How many of you have CSR set up right now and running? One person. So CSR was a new piece of R2. So if you have R2 or R3, and I need to run that as administrator because I have UAC enabled. Or I just have to wait. So CSR essentially goes out and checks all of your resource records for their hardware inventory times, for their software inventory times. Cool. Let's try to run as administrator. There we go. So let me zoom in a little bit. It connects directly to the database. And you can put in an alternate account there. But of course, I have my database information in there. And it's going to check all of these different information. So we have our heartbeat discovery, we have our software inventory, we have our hardware inventory, status messages, and our policy requests. So essentially, the 5 different activities that each client has with the server, it's going to go out and check those things. And it's going to say, hey, if you haven't reported in whatever days, right, I can configure these for whatever days that I want to have them at. If you haven't reported in those number of days, right, it's going to be a cumulative of all of those different ones, then I'm going to mark you as inactive. So why is that one significant? Because when we mark you inactive, you don't get deleted automatically, but we come back here to our client tasks, and I'll see if quickly I can find this one. There it is. So we have our delete inactive client discovery data. That one right there, and we'll go into the properties. That one also by default is no, and you can see on my console it's no. Not much to configure there, but we have a 90-day interval, which is also the default interval. So any client that gets marked as inactive through CSR, or because it got marked as obsolete, or because it got deleted in a child site, will also get deleted after 90 days. So the question often comes up on the forums, and you know, it's a very valid question, is, hey, why doesn't my data in Config Manager match what I have in Active Directory? Well, that's because Active Directory discovery is a one-way thing. It's literally a discovery. It's not a two-way sync. So how can we get closer to making it a sync? Well, this is how you can do that. Right? We set up CSR. So CSR is actually going out and actively polling, essentially, all of our different clients. It's giving us the status of, hey, when is it checked in last? And so now we can kind of tell. Now, 7 days may not be enough, once again, right, depending upon the vacations that you have in your organization. 7 days may not be enough for you to figure out that a client is no longer active on your network. So you can definitely tweak those kind of things. And then, of course, there's kind of a 90-day grace period, or whatever period that you put into this maintenance task before it actually gets deleted out of Config Manager. So do you want something deleted out of Config Manager as soon as it gets deleted from Active Directory? Probably not. You want to have some history there. But maybe you do, right? And so you can definitely tweak the values to figure those kind of things out. One other thing that CSR will do for you. So actually, there's a checkbox there at the bottom. Notice, maybe you don't want it to actually just go mark anything active. Maybe you just want reporting. So when you install CSR, you can also install, I don't remember the number of reports. There's like 4 or 5 reports. Maybe there's like 8. And the reports actually give you detailed information about when it logged in, or when the software inventory was last, when the hardware inventory, when all of those things were last. So that you can now maybe go make manual decisions on, hey, this client's alive or this client's not alive. Hey, look, it's the CEO's secretary client. She's not reporting in. You know, we got to go figure out what to do about that. One other thing that it will do for us, it will actually ping inactive clients also. So that's that second option here. Not line, box. And this isn't just a simple network ping, so it does do an ICMP ping to see if that client's alive, but it will also try to connect to that client and determine whether the service is running or not. So that's a common thing in a lot of environments. Users say, oh, look, I don't want this service, and those that have admin privileges, of course, can do whatever they want, so they go disable that service. Or maybe something else has disabled that service, maybe some bad security software. There's a lot of reasons that it gets disabled. There's other pieces, that it'll actually detect, but it's actually making an active connection to that client to figure some of those kind of things out, whether the BITS client is up to date. And so one of the reports will actually show you that information. So it's not going to do any remediation for you. You're going to have to go figure that out. Except for actually marking it as inactive, which in the long run might delete it. It's not going to go start the service for you. It's not going to go reinstall the client. But it's going to give you the information for you to be able to do those kind of things in the long run. Not perfect, but it's a lot better than having no information about why your clients aren't reporting in now. They've taken that a step further in 2012. They actually have a client health piece. This kind of goes back directly to the WMI stuff also. So the client health piece in 2012 is actually a service that's going to run on every agent or on every config manager managed system that you have out there. It does, I think it's 13 different checks. Things like, is the client started? Is it healthy? Is WMI healthy? So there's actually going to be some WMI checks in there also. That service is going to run at startup, of course, just like any good service does. It's actually a scheduled task also. So it's going to use the task scheduler for Windows. And it's going to run through all of those checks. And then it's going to report that information back to Config Manager. Now, the nice part, some of the things they've done in the console, is that information is actually going to get percolated up right to the Config Manager console. So if you've seen the console, it's completely redone, right? It's not an MMC anymore. And so you're actually going to be able to click on a resource, and you're going to see its client health status, the last time it reported hardware, whether the client agent is running, all of those different types of things, whether you've remediated or not, when the last time you remediated it at. And there's going to be some reporting in there that says how many clients have been remediated recently. So you're going to get a lot more information in the console. And so that's built in. So there's a lot of people that are really happy about that. And it's going to go a long way to fixing all of our WMI issues, hopefully. All righty. And the last status is obsolete. I talked about that one pretty much already. There's a separate task. I won't show you that one because it looks exactly like the inactive task. But of course, if we replace a task or a system with imaging, we want that system to go away. So that's exactly what this task is going to do. We don't want that system to sit around forever. And so this task will do that. Nice little graphics there. I gave you that demo already. And so I guess the summary of all this, and this is something that, like I said, we see in the forums all the time. It's a big, wide product, and it's a really deep product. So you can be a decent config manager administrator and not necessarily know all of these things. But knowing a lot of these things is going to help you troubleshoot any of those issues that come up. Ignorance is not bliss when it comes to being an IT person, especially with Config Manager. So the other things we definitely talked about, IP address boundaries for the win, or IP address range boundaries for the win. That's a huge one for me. Like I said, I think I've gotten the product team to change some functionality in 2012. They approved my DCR, so we'll see what happens. It's not in beta 2 yet, so hopefully that'll be there. HA is going to get improved, but there are options for you. Software updates is a good thing. Use that hotfix. And WMI Health is more than nuking the repository. Here's the resources that I think I mentioned a few times. There we go. My email address is on the very first slide of this deck, so please feel free to Twitter me or contact me via that email address, and I will put you in my queue. I get back to everybody, so I don't have an issue answering questions, and I love helping people. Thanks.